Biotax class today. So, Helen's 6, if you're over here, and Emily is busy, so she's over here. I haven't heard from a couple of others where they are. Cosmo has persevered despite having his wisdom teacher yesterday, or a wisdom teacher yesterday, so good on you, Cosmo. Before we get started, I thought I would run through, does anyone want to talk about anything from last week's session? Who was here? Were you here last week, Caroline? No, you weren't here last week. Last week we talked about sexuality and then various things, and we really only got halfway through before we ran out of time. So if anyone had some comment or question, we could cover that before we start on this. If not, we'll work straight into it. Today, I've got a few handouts and everything. Yes, here it is. Today, we're going to be talking about euthanasia and stuff like that. It's a big deal in media and everything. So, I found this article in the newspaper in 2018. This lady was a doctor. She wrote a book about how to help someone end their life, okay, illegally. And she made the book anonymous, so she fudged names and details, and the police prosecuted her, but they guessed the wrong patient. So they must have guessed the patient of hers that had died and have charged her with killing the patient, but they got it wrong. So they picked the wrong person. So she got away with it. So she was like front page of the paper because she'd done that. and that was an interesting article to read. And I got this other article. And like, oh, look at that. I've gone backwards. We must be supposed to talk about this, right? Because I've just ended up on my old slide. Here we go, I'm back again. I'm good. Okay, so if something comes up, we'll just go back to that because it's all sitting there. Okay, and this one on the screen is like
really slow.
This computer screen, just for those who can't see it, is about 10 slides behind. So it's still halfway through the other. Everything's just caught up. Okay, confusing. Okay, this was in the paper as well in July. There was this Australian scientist named David Goodall. He lived to be 104 years old. Okay, I like took a photo of it while I was having my lunch at Stone Cafe. He did not have a terminal illness, okay, but he said that his quality of life had deteriorated, so he wanted to end his life. Jeremy, welcome. It's good to have you with us. Now I have to ask you, were you here last week? You missed last week, right? Did you watch it online or anything? You're not? So if I was to ask you, do you have any questions about the topic last week, you would be like, no, not really, right?
What topic?
Okay, well, we'll ask Tabby when she comes in as well. I just had a feeling we should talk about it some more, maybe we'll come back to it at the end. So David Goodall was a scientist, an article about him. They're building a memorial in Perth for him because he's a great famous scientist. He says, even up to the age of 90, I was enjoying my life, but I'm not now. So he moved to Switzerland so there he could get someone to officially end his life on his behalf because that was what he wanted to do. And they have a quote from this guy, Philip Nitsch, from Exit International, who said, age without illness is an acceptable reason to achieve assistance to die. Okay, so it's really interesting. In the first days, this guy who's the original Dr. Death, okay, that go travels the world helping people illegally end their life and things like that. Originally, it was all about ending suffering and all that sort of thing, so putting people out of their misery by helping them end their life. Mercy, killing, that was the whole thing. But now, he's progressed to saying just being old, even if you're not sick, that should be an acceptable. Okay, I'm old now, I just want to end my life because I'm old. Okay, this is now the logic that he is proposing. So this is interesting thing to see. So just as we get started, what do we think what are the initial issues? Tabby's here. Good. Tabby, you remember what we talked about last week?
In ethics?
Yes, in ethics.
Sexuality.
Okay, now, do you have any questions or anything you think we didn't really cover that we should cover? Because we sort of finished halfway through, and I thought maybe there's something we might need to cover. This is either going to drop with a yes or a no. We're all waiting.
I actually didn't really go into like the whole, not just necessarily like marital sex and its consequences, but also like the whole sexual purity
Thing?
like topic.
Yes. So we only just started touching on it near out of the time, right? Okay. So what's the burning question that we need to address? What do you think we need to look at? You don't know? Okay. Well, let's have a quick discussion around sexuality. For those of us who weren't here last week and didn't watch the video, we talked about sexuality and we talked about issues around that, really. So let's talk about what are the lessons that we learned from David and Bathsheba. Let's talk about David and Bathsheba because that's a classic sexuality story. So let's talk about David and Bathsheba. What are some of the other key scriptures about sexuality that we might want to look at if we can talk about sexual purity and stuff like that? David and Bathsheba is an obvious one. Any others that we might want to look at? Maybe we can talk about Samson. Maybe we talked about Solomon last week, right? Had many wives and let they lead him into idolatry. Yeah. Okay, so that wasn't really about maybe sexual purity, but just okay. David and Bathsheba. What are some of the things that we think we should learn or observe in that story?
Don't covet somebody else's wife.
Don't covet
Then
somebody
let that person fight in front of that.
and then go kill them for it, right? So we had, if you couldn't really go much worse than there's covet, murder, adultery, in that order. What was the consequences of David and Bathsheba? So we had the baby die, yeah. What was the other consequences of David and Bathsheba? Other consequences of David and Bathsheba, we had names. Chaos and his descendants. Because of this, Bible says, we had Ammon, Tamar, Absalom, rebellion. These are the fruit that flowed out of what David did there. And that's probably one of the, if you're looking at consequences and things like that, the generational impact of sexual not purity, sexual immorality and stuff like that is very significant. We all know, right, of cases of abuse and things like that carry on through generations. And the lifestyles of adultery, immorality and stuff like that carry on and magnify as they go through generations. Okay, what about anything else we should get out of the story? How did David end up in this spot? How did he end up going down this road? He didn't go to battle, that's right. He should have been going to war. But he stopped fighting and started cruising, and then he took his eyes off what his job was. His job was to be Israel's leader, to be the conqueror, to the one that gave them victory. When he took his eyes off that, and that's when he ended up going down this road. That's pretty important to realise as well. Yeah. What else do we need to talk about sexual purity? Let's have one question or comment from every person in the class, just to see where we go. Okay, Tabby's contributing very well. Jeremy, what have you got? We talked a little bit last week about how we stand strong, surrounding ourselves in a healthy environment, and fleeing temptation. We talked about media overwhelming us with wrong images and wrong concepts.
I guess like the not really stigma, but like accountability. So like how people are afraid to seek the man like stumble.
Okay.
Yeah. So I guess like that's where we go about that.
What do you mean What do you mean seek accountability?
Like humbling yourself, like when you have.
So you mean confession and restoration type thing?
Yeah.
Yes. What do you do about it after you see a problem? So yes, there's definitely an embarrassment. And so why are people most afraid of confessing something in this line? And why do you think this is like the big stigma around you can get away with anything but don't get away with it? Don't mention that. Any idea why that might be our culture in church? Shame. Why specifically do you think immorality has got so much shame around it?
Because of the value of marriage.
Because we uphold marriage highly, so therefore if you break that one, it's really bad. Yes? Yeah. Okay.
I was going to say, because of that whole fear of like sexual immorality, the ones themselves, so it's very like personal.
So yes, obviously it's a personal thing, right? It's not like robbing a bank. Okay, you're making yourself more vulnerable and stuff like that. Okay, so we do, and it is the Bible does say, above all things, avoid that because you sin against your own body. It is actually like the consequences are greater. But on the flip side, when we look at church discipline and things like that, how many people have ever seen or been aware of anyone being disciplined in a church environment? Do you know what I mean by church discipline? Does anyone know what I mean by church discipline? Jeremy's got no idea. Cosmo, church discipline? Church discipline? Caroline's nodding. Michaela? Nodding. Debbie? What's church discipline? No? Oh, wow. Okay. Caroline, tell us. Can you tell us the story? Anonymous story?
It happened in my country. It's my pastor who had with us with my husband. And I think he had an affair with one of the youth went to confide in him because she was having some struggles. And
yeah.
Out of that, an affair started.
Yes.
Because he was a senior pastor and he's been there for quite a long time. And so when the story was exposed, the elders of the church, just decided to discipline him, and he was told to retire.
Yep.
And maybe just be honored in that sense of just retiring instead of being fired. So he retired, but I don't know, somewhere he started a
Okay, so we have a pastor, gets into an affair, he's a senior pastor, has an affair with one of the youth in church. He gets asked to retire, step down from ministry, not sort of discreetly, is that right, or publicly?
It was discreetly, because they didn't really go in front of church and say this is what's happening.
But everybody knew?
Okay, I knew because I knew the leaders.
Yeah, so you knew because you were involved in the church.
So, but the whole church, some of them knew, but
some people did, some people didn't. Okay.
Discreetly, yeah.
Asked to step down discreetly, okay, and then moves on and starts another church somewhere else. Okay. That's interesting. And Michaela, do you know a story?
Mine's kind of similar, except it was very public. So when I was like 15, like 13, our senior pastor had an affair with a couple of the elders' wives. So he had multiple
Okay.
affairs going on at the same time.
Yeah.
And then they did have to, in front of church, say that this has happened. And he was fine because he was still quite young.
Yeah.
But now he's started his own church.
This is interesting, right? Okay, okay. So the Bible does say there is precedent, right? Expel the immoral brother from among you. Okay, in 1 Corinthians, you've got this guy who's committing immorality. You can't let that continue in the church because it's going to spread. Okay, like yeast in a loaf, it's going to expand and so you have to deal with it. You have to remove that person from the congregation. So I remember in my church, we had. In the churches I've been in, it hasn't been a pastor, but we've had 2 pastors already. That's interesting, 2 pastor stories. Pastors from Sue. We had several young people involved in sexual immorality, and so they were, what did they do? How did they do? They were addressed, it was like they were reprimanded, and the church was advised that these people were living against the ways, a godly way, and so therefore they were going through a period of discipline and stuff like that. Okay, so that was quite public. Okay, we also have, so there's some churches that think leaders should be done publicly, and other just normal church members, it's a private thing. It all depending on the impact of the person. Now, what other things apart from sexual immorality? What else does the Bible talk about this sort of discipline for? One of our reasons is that we all know a sexual immorality story where someone's been disciplined, okay? But what are the other things that the Bible says you should do the same thing for? There's a list, right? Anyone know what the other things are that are all in the same sentence? Ooh, now this is interesting, right? So we had a guy at church who claimed he had cancer, okay? And he went to, the church was called to pray and fast for him, right? So he had the congregation of 300 people all praying and fasting for this guy. People were like, will we fundraise? I don't know if we were fundraising to support him, but people were bringing him like meals, and he was going treatment and da-da-da-da-da. And this went on for several years. And then someone got sus, someone who was a medical person in the church got sus about the whole deal and suggested to the pastor that the pastor should accompany him, they and the pastor should accompany him to his next appointment. And so the whole thing was fabrication, okay? And so he was disciplined before the church. The church was told, this person we've all perhaps is phony. The whole thing's made up. And he was like excluded from fellowship of the church because he wasn't living in a, he was calling himself a believer and living completely opposite and stuff like that. And there's a list of about 5 things. Immorality is one of them. Swindler, that's a con man, okay? No con man in the church, okay? A slanderer, a greedy person, okay? These are all in the same box. The problem is, how do you define if someone's greedy or not, right?
Okay, what type of greed?
What? Yeah, okay. How is it very?
Very greed.
That's right. It's complicated, right?
I might have to leave.
So a public con, pretty easy to work out. Okay, and so that was easy. But the problem with sexual immorality is pretty cut and dry. You can tell. Okay, there's like a 100% or verifiable fact, whatever. This one is pretty obvious con. Other ones, slanderer, okay, and greedy is a little bit vague on what it actually means. And so, because you can't have I know what's going on here, this is definitely 100% verifiable, people can dispute the decisions, that becomes a grey area and people are very slow to do anything about it. But the concept of church discipline, based on not letting that influence spread throughout the community and leave the whole group astray. And exactly how that's done, it's a complicated thing. Whether it actually works is the other question. The goal of restoration is that the person will be saved and restored, the goal of discipline. The 2 stories we heard, the person continued on and basically went to start their own church somewhere else. Whether there's been any restoration and healing on it, that's debatable, I guess, because you can start your own church without that. The stories the ones that I recall, I don't think we had significant progress from my knowledge of the people. They didn't make significant progress. But it's interesting. But there's two goals. It's one goal is personal restoration. One goal is preservation of the flock. And I happen to know my church in New Zealand. And it's only just starting to unfold. This is 30 years ago. My church in New Zealand, there's a whole generation of youth that have abandoned the church, have been either gone into homosexuality or other ungodly lifestyle things, great chaos, split of families, divorce families, all sorts of things. It's looking like rumours coming through the grapevine that there was some sort of abusive behaviour in that youth group at the time, and that spread across, and we're seeing generations later the impact of as these kids have grown up, like the impact of what it's done to them. So, and because that was happening and was never dealt with, the person or people were continuing to do what they like freely in that youth group. It's caused a long-term carbon effect. So that's interesting. And that's why sometimes there has to be that exclusion. It's complicated, but it's an important thing how we deal with it, what we do about it. And that's because of this whole thing of, I might get publicly shamed and kicked out of the church. That's, I guess, a reason why people aren't wanting to confess and do anything with it. I wanted to bring it up. This is the sort of thing you were asking, Jeremy, right? Yeah. How do we? One of the things I think is we don't talk about it enough in a positive role model light and what we're aiming for. So people don't know what they're supposed to be aiming for. So they just know this sort of, on one hand, we've got to avoid this bad thing because someone said it's bad, but we don't know why and what we're supposed to be aiming for. But also we don't talk, I guess, about enough the strategies and steps and how the benefits of getting this whole area right. How do we get restoration and accountability? I have a personal, I sort of think we overrate accountability because for most people that I know, it's very easy to be falsely accountable. Like Tabby was supposed to be accountable to me for her assignments, right? So I text her, how are you going with your assignments? And she answers me. She can tell me anything she likes, right? Okay. How am I, unless I'm sitting beside her at college watching her doing her assignments, I've got no idea whether she's telling me the right thing or not. And it's the same. This is one of the problems. Accountability is a great idea, but only if you're actually honest. Okay, so how are you going with temptation? Say, I'm doing really good. Okay. I haven't looked at any pornography for 4 weeks. That's amazing. Well done, you're doing so good. Well, I could say what I like to keep everyone happy. So it all depends really on the person's internal sincerity, and that probably one of the things that's going to drive that is when we see the link between us losing the actual sabotaging and derailing the call of God in our life through stumbling, how that can cause such bad effect. That may motivate us to actually do something about it. That's some of that internal motivation. Without internal motivation, you're going to have very little chance of getting anywhere. And without a true Jesus encounter, you're going to have no chance either. Okay, and so if you've got people in a youth group or in a church, okay, who haven't actually encountered Jesus in a real life transforming way, then they're trying to live according to godly lifestyle. Well, that's going to be a hard work uphill battle. And so sometimes where we're trying to get Christian lifestyle out of people that don't have Jesus on the inside, Jesus is not actually alive there, then that's going to be hard work as well. And being discerning about that can be helpful. Cosmo, your turn. Jeremy, anything else we need to talk about? Where are we going? This is any good? Yeah? But it is a game changer for just about everybody, right? And the fact that if you have a pastor having affairs with multiple elders' wives, there's obviously, I think that's the other thing we have to realise, the strength of the temptation and the strength of the attraction. It's not a privilege. It's not just like, I guess, like an alcoholic. Every time they sniff alcohol, right, they're in trouble, right? And this is the same for sexual temptation, stuff like that. Especially if it's already been a problem, you can't just pretending you're over it or downplaying the strength of it is a problem. We have to realise how, because we are built wired to be drawn in towards sexuality, it's how we're supposed to live. Survival of the species is an inbuilt genetic thing. All right. So we obviously it's a real thing. We can't downplay the power of it. And that's if we downplay it, then we assume that it won't happen to me. That's obviously a problem. And so, what are some of the? If you're a pastor and you don't want to do what these people are doing, what are some of the boundaries that you should set up personally in your life to avoid this sort of thing happening?
I think, like maybe just set boundaries along with the
Obviously, it should not be a pastor meeting a woman on their own, especially for counselling. Right? That's obviously you're setting yourself up for trouble, especially for anything that's going to be emotive or long-term intense. If you have a pastor one-on-one meeting and all that, you're asking for trouble. What else? Yes? Anything else? So what should you do? You've got, if having these counselling from one of the pastors, what should happen? How should it be handled? What's that?
That's someone making some
Accompany her, yes. It's good for her to have someone to accompany her if she's comfortable with that, because having your own support person there can help you. What if it's private and she doesn't want any of her friends to know?
In a public place.
A public place, yes. So public place is good. If you think you're going to cry a lot, that's one of the reasons it's helpful to have a big meeting room with glass windows, right? Okay, that's very helpful because no matter what's going on, everyone will be aware of what's going on. Having a female counsellor would be helpful, right? Or a couple counselling. So if the more boundaries, logistical boundaries that we put in the way, the better of anything going wrong. Accountability for counselling sessions is very important. Just because even if nothing happens, someone can say something different. And that whole thing, reputation scam. I'm aware of a situation where a person's reputation's been significantly damaged when, as far as I know, it's completely unfounded, but observers start rumours and that person's reputation can be significantly damaged for probably no reason. But that's just what happens. That's where we live in. And so the more logistical boundaries that we set up is more helpful. So accountability and things like, for example, accountability can work where you say to someone, I've determined that for example, I'm never going to be doing counselling one-on-one with a woman. And if you ever hear of me or see of me doing it, tell me off. Okay? So I'm giving someone else permission to tell you off and to remind you of your boundaries and to help you enforce your boundaries. That's sensible. And that's helpful. So that's so other people can go, hold on a minute, you've forgotten that you told us you're never to be doing these. These are some of the things. So trips in cars, okay, long extended projects will require a lot of together time. All of those things where you're working together on anything intense, complicated, anything that requires a lot of time and can start to build a wrong sort of relationships. We have to be aware of that. We have to be putting boundaries about it. We have to be making sure our personal relational soul is healthy. This is one of the big deals as well, right? The reason that a lot of pastors fall into this is there's something, obviously they're carrying a problem before. If their personal soul is calm and healthy and their relationship needs are all being met, they're not needing anything from the people they're counselling or working with. Okay, and that's a significant thing. Working on our personal, emotional, relational health so that we're coming from a place of strength and not a place of need. Very helpful. And being able to go, hold on a minute, I've just found myself coming close to one of the lines I never thought I'd cross. What is happening? What's inside of me that's pulling me that way? And being able to stop and think, and then maybe that's just a counselling session. I need to talk to some expert counsellor. I just found myself going somewhere I never thought I would go. Okay, even if I'm 400 steps away from the boundary line of danger, but I've found something inside of me that I didn't know was there. I need to look at it, work out what's going on, and help deal with that and resolve that emotional thing within you. Because we all understand that we are actually emotionally driven people, not logic driven people. Even men, right, are emotionally driven people. It's out of the heart that we live, not out of our head, most of the time. This is one of my David Storer quotes. Why do doctors smoke cigarettes, right? Every doctor knows that it's killing you, but they still do it. Okay, because they're not living out of logic, they're living out of a heart thing. They're dealing with an anxiety, they're dealing with some sort of heart level thing, and they've crossed over what they know is smart and sensible because of something happening in their heart. So we've got to keep healthy, strong hearts as a foundation to protect us from this sort of stuff. Okay, this is good. Cosmo, question, comment?
Yeah, to go off the line. I said about because I've been in that position.
Yeah.
When I was younger, 18. And I just fell into the temptation. Then picked up my friends, and they saw something different.
Yeah.
And they were people that I trusted to speak in my life.
Yeah.
So that's the only time like I was accountable. I wasn't accountable to any of my leaders because I was afraid of that judgment of, hey, I'm gonna say this, and then you're like, okay, cool. Or they're gonna be like, they're gonna judge me for it.
Yeah.
Difficult to have those feelings about leaders and feel like you couldn't talk to them.
Yeah.
Because they're gonna judge you.
So was your church a grace-based church, right? This was a church that talked about the grace of God and Jesus forgives you and all that sort of thing?
God will hard.
Yeah, right? So it's not like it was a strict church, right? So even though we talk all the time about grace and mercy and forgiveness and blah, 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 people still have this thing. So maybe we need to work on how we express pastoral advice and things like that, because people still have a feeling like, I'll be in trouble personally. Maybe how we handle that. Maybe how we explaining to people in advance how are we going to deal with it and what our goals are and stuff. I'm also not a fan of things like this is personal comment. Not a fan of things like long engagements and long-term relationships. I think it's unrealistic to get in a 10-year relationship assuming you'll get engaged and married at the end of like 7 years or something like that. You're setting yourself up for a time. There's a ticking time bomb, and every time you take a step closer to intimacy, right, and then think you'll be okay, you're asking for trouble, and it's just completely unrealistic. Unless you're not in the same country or something like that, then you'll be right. Okay, Caroline, comment, question.
I think this realization that we are all in form of temptations and this intentional setting boundaries around ourselves. What we need to do is keep things alive.
Yes.
So can be a setup of the enemy just destroy their lives. So just being always aware that it can happen to me and I need to be in place.
Yep.
Make sure that when that chance comes, we can do something for it.
Yes, totally. We have to be regular and disciplined. And every time you find yourself saying, this is a special case, I need to break the boundary because this is a special situation, you're wrong, right? It's probably not that important, okay? And you need to like, whoa, hold on back, because that's the first step, is stepping over the boundary because this is a special case situation that requires extra special blah, 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 blah. No, it doesn't. Okay, Hannah.
Yeah, I was going to say kind of similar thing. But we were talking about last week how a lot of the time they expect marriage to fix things and
Yes.
then think that you're okay because if you're married, you're not going to be tempted. If you're married,
Yes.
you're already in a relationship, so it's going to be an issue. But yeah, realizing that like it doesn't discriminate.
Obviously,
for every
yes.
single person.
Yes, that's a significantly good point. It doesn't stop just because people got married. Obviously, pastors all the time. So the other comment on pastors, high stress, high demand life job, it sets you up as well for trouble. So we have to be aware of that. If you're in a supporting role for pastors, obviously pastors with significant like load on them, carrying extra vulnerability, so we have to be aware of that as well. But yes, marriage doesn't solve everything, because it's obviously people are still tempted in some ways. But again, your home base has to be healthy. If your home base is not healthy, if your personal family upbringing hasn't been healthy in that area, right, then you've got a disadvantage. And then if your home base where you end up landing your own marriage, whatever, is not healthy and thriving, you've got another disadvantage. So we have to really work on getting our home bases right and sound, so we've got a firm foundation. Okay. We're sort of done, but it's a very important topic, so we want to be in conversation about it all the time, so that we can stay aware, stay fresh. We're always getting bombarded. And a really good whiteboard communication. Okay, we're talking about euthanasia. What's the big deal? What are the main things that we have to talk about with euthanasia? What's euthanasia about, and what should we be thinking about it if we're Christians?
Isn't it taking life and death into somebody else's hands? Like removing, even though like the people who want it, it's removing.
But in someone's life,
Yeah.
at your request, what saying?
Yeah. Which.
What are the things that we would comment about first? What do we think?
What did you ask?
What do we think? Christians, what do we think? Big no-no? What are the boundaries? What are the boundaries that we think it crosses? Don't kill people, right? Life is proof do not kill. That's where we start from, right?
Like we disagree with suicide. Why would we agree with assisted suicide?
Very good. When you open this door, then that door becomes okay as well, right? And it's the same thing. So if we disagree with suicide, why do we disagree with suicide?
Ending life, but also it's taking away, like, God has a plan for your life, and it's not to end by your own hand.
Yes. Our whole point is we're always proponents of hope, right? No matter how bad it is right now, there's hope, there's a future. God has not abandoned us, and suicide is when you've run out of hope, no purpose, no future. But that's against the gospel. Okay. What are some other things that might be running around in our heads when we're discussing this with people? And in the world, what's the comment? What's the attitude of the people that are proponents? Okay. Why should we be allowed to? Why should we be in suffering? What's wrong? It's not fun. That's right. It's not pleasant. But
like the definition of suffering is slowly just morphing into what people wanted to, like.
Yes.
Originally, like with the Dr. Death, it was originally people who were sick and like
terminally ill, had 3 weeks to live, and constant pain. Yeah.
Swapped into old people.
Just old and bored.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then eventually, like it's going to hit. What about people who have some suicidal thoughts?
Yes,
Like,
yes, exactly. The whole progressive
about
nature of thought once you cross this line. So for those of you that weren't maybe with me, this article was about a scientist that said he's not 104 now, I just want to die. I'm not sick, but I can't do much, so I'm going to end my life. So I think it's time to end his life, and so the person building a memorial for him because he was such a great scientist.
Also, if that scientist killed himself, would they still build the memorial?
Yeah, right. Like, what's the big deal? Yeah. And if he was killed in a car accident, would we all be sad? Right? There's conflict. So there's obviously conflicting thoughts, but the progressive nature of the ideology is one thing we have to be concerned about. Same as with progressive nature of abortion. You know, there's an article which I didn't talk about, but I just found it again when I was doing all this. It was published by some philosophers at some university, I think in England and in New Zealand or Australia or somewhere like that. No, Australian university. And they were saying that the same reasons that permit us and justify abortion of infants, of abortion of unborn babies, should therefore logically apply to babies that have been born. Because what they're saying, what's the difference between a baby that's 1 week old and a baby that's 1 week to be born? If it's okay, then what's the difference? There's no difference. Okay, and they based it on the fact that the child is not aware of a future, it's not aware of a personality, it's not aware of what they're going to miss out on. They're not going to know any better what's the problem. It's not like they're going to be disappointed that they never got to be an astronaut, because they don't know that that's what they're called to be. So a very controversial statement, but logical progression of what's been said before. So Victoria made a new law. This would be 2 years ago. Does anyone know what Victoria's new law was? It's a couple of years ago. They approved if you're over 18 and you have a terminal condition with less than 1 year to live, you are and can get access to fatal drugs to self-administer. Okay, so this is the new thing that Victoria made passed a couple of years ago. Does anyone know anyone? Has anyone got a story about this whole area? Someone that's considered, wanted to, has in their lives, like last stage and sort of pain, suffering, that sort of thing. Yeah.
My grandmother, but my dad's mum.
Yeah.
Her was like really big deteriorating, and it has been something that she's like brought up. Like all of, I don't know, it's really hard sometimes. She's like being like with God. She's like so strong in faith.
Yeah.
There are moments sometimes where she's like she brings it up as like a beautiful option, and you know, like my parents talked about bringing her to live in Australia. In Australia for her.
Right.
Whereas like in Zim, it's not.
Yeah.
And yeah, so because her health is deteriorating, and there's also like the added thing of like mentally she's not doing well because she's had to bury like some of her children.
Yes.
And so she's all alone in Zim, and
Yeah.
her kids are there. Like those two factors.
Yeah.
They're a really big part in her like making that consideration.
Yep.
And it's because her like is great.
Yeah.
Right minds, there is like quite a lot of difference between like my dad and like the rest of like society siblings.
Right.
What is the right?
What should be done? Yes. Controversial. So do you? An interesting thought, because you know her. If 20 years ago, if it was her mother, what would she have said? What do you think? Eh? She would have said no, definite no, right? Okay, yeah, interesting. Now, I've got an interesting story just prompted me. My mother-in-law has been sick for 40 years. So she was, she had rheumatic fever when she was a kid. So she had heart problems since she was 10 years old. Okay, we came to Australia in '97 because she had 2 years to live, and we, like, Kristen didn't want her mum to be like pass away in Australia without her being here and stuff. So in '97 we moved to Australia to be here with the last years of her mum's life. Her mum is still living just around the corner from us, 25 years later. And the other thing you said, even when we were in Perth, because she was having a heart issues, we had like ambulance to the house every 4 weeks, you know, there's an ambulance coming to because she's having a heart attack and stuff like this. She's had a pacemaker for like 40 years and stuff like this. So she's had a lot of things, and there was times she would tell off her husband, my father-in-law. She was like, we'd turn up at the house, right? And she'd go, did you call them? I told you just to leave me alone. It's like, if this happens again, I don't want an ambulance. I don't want him to come. I just want to go. It's not worth it. Blah, blah, blah. And she would have this these outbursts at us. But now, okay, she's worse in her health is worse now than it was then. But I think her outlook is positive. Because and part of that is the family, the great-grandchildren coming to see her, and the whole thing around her, her environment of where she's living and the people around her and stuff. Because of that, I think she has more positive outlook now than before. Because we haven't heard that for a while. The whole "I don't want you to call an ambulance" thing. She's now like, oh, you better push the button and call the ambulance because I'm feeling sick, right? Okay, totally opposite. And a lot of it is, it's not the illness, but it's what's happening in their emotion about how they're feeling, whether they're surrounded by support or not. So even for Tabby's mum, right? If you're surrounded by family and stuff like that, you often feel more positive regardless of what's happening. And that's one of our things, right? The suffering, how much of it is in our head and our heart, and how much of it is physical suffering. The Bible says a strong spirit sustains you in sickness, but if you've got a crushed spirit, it's all over. And that's one of the things that comes into play. What are some things that could go wrong with Victoria's law of having legal access to fatal drugs if you are in terminal illness? You could fake it, yes. You could get the drugs and then you could give them to someone else if you wanted to. Yeah, that's a bad idea, right? But what happens if you recover? We all know people are really, really sick and recover, right? And I guess that's the worst case scenario, that someone could have recovered but didn't, and if they wait another 3 weeks, it could have got better. That's our Christian hope thing. This video up here, watch these videos if you want to get depressed. Okay. These are 3 people who ended their lives, and they videoed themselves in lead up to. So Brittany had brain cancer, and she wanted to move. She moved to a different state in America where she was allowed to end her life, before she lost the ability to do so, because she was losing control of her ability to reason and ability to control herself. So she wanted to, and it's her saying, "Why I'm doing it, I want to do it now before I lose the ability to do it." And there's someone else with the same that she's saying is always, "Hey, just trust God, don't do it." I can. Tony Nicholson he was in a wheelchair. He had some really bad accident, brain damage and everything, and he eventually died from pneumonia. He starved himself to death because he wanted to. He was unable to self-administer drugs because he had a stroke. Eventually, he self-starved to death and died from pneumonia. And there's other ones, some twins in Belgium, that they were blind. They've been blind. They lived together. They were blind, and they both started going deaf. So they decided together that they'd go to the doctor and end their lives, because being blind and deaf, that would just be too much. That's where they. That's what those ones are about. To give you a feel, because it's an academic exercise until you've met people, thought about it, talked about it. What happens right now? I have the person that led Christine to Christ. Her husband had a terminal bone condition, so he had his bones would break all the time, and he had a thing where it got to the point where every time he coughed, he'd break his ribs. So it's pretty rough. And I remember visiting him, and he said to me, "Oh, look, I've decided I want to die. I've had enough of this." He sort of was a Christian, and he became a Christian later in his life. And he's like, "I want to die." And so we prayed together and stuff, and the presence of God is powerful. And I read in scripture, I had a scripture for him, and he was like, "Oh, that's exactly what I've been thinking," and da-da-da. But he said, "Oh, I just want to tell you, I want to put us all together. I've decided I want to die." So what happened was, he said that he had pneumonia or something. And so he asked the doctors to stop treating it, stop giving him antibiotics, so that the pneumonia would kill him. That was a great, this is the normal thing that people do, but unfortunately, it took a lot longer than he thought he was. I remember him saying to me, like, "I thought I would be dead by now, but life just won't let go." He couldn't actually, it was interesting observing the process of him. He didn't quite, I don't think he changed his mind about doing it, but it wasn't what he thought it was going to be. But we want to look at what happens at the moment, and there's 3 types of end of life. Okay, active and passive. forward, backwards, forward, forward. Okay, what have we got here? Voluntary, involuntary, and non-voluntary are three categories of how. So, active, voluntary. That's when I want to in my life, and I actively do it. Okay, this is that's what we're talking about right now. Voluntary, passive. That's different. That's me not doing something. So already, okay, it's quite common. But this is what happens in the hospice and things like this. Caroline, you know about this, right? Yeah. So, and because I had one of my friends passed away last year, and she was in this sort of situation where she had cancer, and all the treatments weren't working and stuff like that. And so she went through in the hospice at Murdoch, where they're treating her for pain, but they're not doing, well, they had nothing else they could do. But passive end of life is where there's certain medical treatment interventions, right, which we are required, the doctors are required to do. They give you pain medication and things like this. But other things, what they call extraordinary interventions, such as life support machines and ventilators and things like that, these are considered active medical treatments, and it's okay to not provide this care to people. So if someone is near the end of their life and they're only being kept alive by ventilator and they're in ongoing pain and things like that, it is a normal thing to do. But to stop doing that, what's happening? The doctor is not killing the person, their condition kills them, and we just don't slow it down as much. And this is often what happens in a hospice environment, end of life environment. And this has been happening for a long time. So the pneumonia and the broken ribs and everything was going to kill our friend. And the doctors could have tried longer to keep him alive and to fight the pneumonia, but at his request they stopped administering the antibiotics. So involuntary, we obviously understand is not okay. So if I want the doctor to keep treating me, it's not okay for the doctor to say, "Oh, I've changed my mind. I'm not going to try and keep you alive anymore." And non-voluntary is when you can't make that decision yourself. So it's not we all or not. It's non-voluntary is when you no longer have the capacity to make a decision. And this is one of the things that we're talking about. Should we end someone's life or not? So it's common if someone can't make a choice. Like I said, this is where some of the family have to decide whether to turn off the machine and things like that. And even that is a complicated process, right? So this is not euthanasia, okay? Because it's not us killing the person. It's what we're talking about this column here. We're going to decide to do something. So there's a case that came up recently where there was a guy he's due to some accident, motorbike accident, head injury, brain damage. He was not on any he was fed through a tube because he wasn't conscious, not conscious much. He occasionally blinked his eyes, okay, but he'd been in that state for 5 years or something like that, okay. And the decision was, should they keep feeding him or not? Because if you don't feed him, he's going to die. Or should they end his life in some other way? And there was discussion was what would he choose? If he was able to communicate, would he want to lie there on the bed doing nothing all day, just blinking his eyes every now and then, or not? And there was a legal fight between certain members of the family that said, "Oh, we should end his life," and other members of the family said, "There's always hope. We should keep him alive." And I think in that one, last I heard on the story on that one was that the end his life people were ahead on the game, and that's where it was going to go. But we had a case recently. We should read this letter. This is the Archbishop of Perth and Catholic Church talking about the new laws that are being proposed in WA about euthanasia. We want to read that. You might want to read this. This is Ocean was a kid who had a brain tumour in Perth a couple of years ago, and it went to court because the parents didn't want to do radiology or chemotherapy. They just wanted to do herbal treatments. Okay? Family thinks that's crazy. Okay, so, and it really was a really public explanation of how ethical decisions like this are made. So we've medical doctors wanting to treat him, they basically they said, if we start right now with aggressive radiology and chemotherapy, right, there's a 50% chance that in 5 years' time, he'll be alive and healthy. Okay, there's a 50% chance that the tumour will kill him, the 50% chance that we'll beat it, and he'll live. Okay, and the parents were like, the side effects are really bad, he might go blind. He doesn't like the treatment, we'll do a non-aggressive herbal alternative medicine treatment instead. And so they didn't turn up for appointments at last on some of that, and the hospital became concerned, and ended up going to the ethics committee met, and they discussed the options, and they went to court to get the court to require him to get treatment, to come and instruct that treatment be done. And so then we looked at the various things that the court looked at and the ethics committee looked at to decide what was the right way to go. And it was time sensitive because every week or every day that you didn't start the treatment decreased the chances of it working. You had to get onto it quickly. And so the hospital, so it was quite a high profile thing. So one of the things I look at is the burdens versus the benefits. How bad is the treatment compared with the likelihood of cure, right? So if it's going, like they will look at, okay, so in this case, there's a likelihood that he'll go blind, okay? And there's a likelihood that it's very unpleasant. Chemotherapy is not fun for anybody, and radiotherapy. He'll be sick maybe for a year. He'll feel awful for a year or two, okay? He may go blind, but he could live. And so which is better? Do we risk the blindness to keep him alive? And this is the thing that happens. In some situations, the treatment is worse than the cure. And sometimes they will look at it and say, is there any point starting on the treatment if it's actually the end result is going to be worse than the cure? So that's one thing they looked at. In this case, they said a 50% chance of living is way too high to walk away from at the risk of going blind. And a normal parent, well, I said an average parent would say, I want my child to live, even if they're blind, they'll still have a life. In 21st century in Australia, you can be blind and have a good life. So we want them to live. That would be a normal decision. One of this option is, do you try and cure him, or do you just minimise discomfort? Curative versus palliative. Those were two choices. And the ethics committee said, trying to cure him, 50% chance of living, definitely that's an ethical thing to do. They also said it could be ethically okay to choose a non-curing palliative option, minimising discomfort, not even trying to cure the tumour, but minimising the discomfort through a lower level, less aggressive chemotherapy. Okay, because that could minimise his discomfort with the expectation that he'll pass away in a year or so. And they said that could possibly be supported. Some people might choose that, and that'd be reasonable. But trying to just use herbal treatments that had no evidence that they would help at all would not be acceptable as an ethical treatment, because you're not trying to cure him and you're not addressing discomfort at all. So they rejected that option. One of the things they have to look at is whose interests are most important. Like, is it all about the parents? Is it about the children? And so in this case, it was very clearly, they all wanted it about the children. So it all had to be about what was best for the child. And were the parents able to walk the child through a hard journey to recovery? That was one of the things they had to think about. You had to talk about what's the probable outcome, because they're guessing. Okay, and so then you get like an argument between medical experts on what's going to work and what's not, and that's a complicated thing to think about. Some of the quotes that I've got a thing here, which I've underlined, the main things that they talked about. Which I'll give you. They said parental autonomy may be limited. This is an ethical thing, right? Parents don't get to find the same about their kids, because if it's considered that the parents aren't doing what's in the child's best interest, the government will sometimes override the parents' issue. Now, this is interesting. In France, there was a lady who has an intellectual disability. Okay, he was pregnant, and the government said they were going to force the baby to be terminated, right? Because if the mother of the woman, so the baby's grandmother, said she would look after it, they said you're not able to look after him adequately. Okay, so we're going to require her to have an abortion and end the baby's life. The mother wanted to keep the baby. The grandmother wanted to keep the baby. Someone, somewhere, has said they didn't think it was in the best interests of somebody. Okay, and so this was a big thing. They got overturned by a high court, and it got turned around, but there was like a worldwide petition against the health minister in England or something to make this change because this is obviously not okay. But that was parental autonomy is sometimes limited. The burdens and benefits of any treatment, yes. Active therapy was considered an ethically supportable option. I've talked about that. They said the problem was the family were withholding standard therapy. We talked about there's normal therapy and extra therapy. Normal therapy, which is everyday things like painkillers and stuff, should not be held back. That's not ever okay to do. It's not like a ventilator and stuff, but just even the normal treatments, they were rejecting it. So it's got a list of the different things, some of the key points. Where the chances of survival are higher and the potentially long-term burdens are less, a palliative approach might not be ethically supportable. So, and then you can see they list, if you read the whole report, it's 16 pages, they list out all the options. Option 1, option 2, option 3, and then they decide, is that ethically supportable or not? And they go through each one. So in the end, they ordered the child to be brought to the hospital. His passport had been taken off him already, and they ordered him to be hospital, start treatment and stuff. But because it took 3 weeks to get to court, then they, after about a year, 6 months or a year, the child passed away. And it was interesting, even in this court judgment, they said, we will start the treatment on Monday because it's his birthday, having a birthday party on Saturday. So we won't start the treatment until after. So there was, reading the court in that case, it was very interesting. They, consideration of the parents and the situation that the child was in and how they balanced it all out was very interesting. Okay, we're finished, we're late. Sharon is probably outside waiting to come in. We need to stop. But we want to think about, this is one of the big deal situations, right? It's one of the big things happening in our society today and what we do about it. The other things that are in the background we haven't talked about at all is the economics of it. It costs money to keep people alive. Right? And it's a lot more economically supportable for the government's budget to allow people to end their life because then you're not having to look after them in people's homes and hospitals and things like that. Okay? And no one would ever say that that's the reason that we do it, but in the background, if you're an old person in a home or something and your life is bad because there's no money to look after you, it becomes a lot easier to persuade you. Like my home care business or my aged care business would do better if I didn't have this person using all my resources, right? So there's an economic thing that can come into play, and that's where things that are made maybe with good motivation get manipulated for the sake of money. So that I can save money if I can convince this person that they should end their own life and things like that. Which are all the reasons, some of the reasons why the Christians are generally opposed to it. As you see, the Catholic Church completely opposed to it, and he puts a good argument there about that. Okay, time 10:05, we must finish. Let's get out of the room for 5 minutes and have a rest, and I'm going to turn on the aircon because